Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Chat EbT. I'm your host, Mohammed Ibrahim Tayob. Today I have with me a very special guest. She's the co-founder of Clicked, a company that is helping parents and kids make the technology world a safer environment for all. Please help me in welcoming Sarah Hoffman. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mohammed. Great to be here.
No, it's such a pleasure. We've been chatting and we've been trying to get this date sorted out for quite some time, so it's so happy that it's finally on the books. But, I heard about your company from my wife, actually, and she was very, very interested because obviously this has become such a big concern for most parents, around kids using devices, kids on social media, so on and so forth. So before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your journey from your social media law and then merging into creating Clicked.
Sure. So, as you said, before I started Clicked, I was a social media lawyer. I worked in a company called the Digital Law Company, and a big part of that job was going to speak to parents at schools, going to speak to students at schools, and I would speak to parents about all the really, really scary things about the online world, all the risks and all the threats, and I would speak to kids basically about how not to mess up online. And after doing these talks for some time, I started to notice, I suppose, three main things, really. I started to notice that, firstly, when it came to the students, it's such a prolific part of their lives that to go in as a guest speaker once a year and tell them the things that, the ways that they shouldn't mess up is not enough anymore. It's like saying kids are going to have one sex ed talk for their whole lives and then they know what there is. It's such a inextricable part of our kids' lives. There's no such thing for our kids as online and offline. This is just the world they live in.
Very true.
So what I started to really notice is we would go and talk to a school, and 3 weeks later the same school would phone us with a crisis, a sexting scandal, a cyberbullying, a racist meme that had been sent around. And I started to realize that as powerful as these talks were, they weren't enough. What was really needed was ongoing conversations, ongoing curriculum, conversations at school and conversations at home as well. Mm-hmm. It's not a one and done situation. The second thing I started to notice is, while I was doing a really, really good job of terrifying parents, I think most parents would leave my talks with eyes like this, vowing to move to a deserted island with no Wi-Fi or drive over a phone with a 4x4. That's not a practical solution. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, while things like sexting scandals and cyberbullying are obviously real concerns, what I wasn't doing enough of is equipping everyday parents with skills that they can use every single day in their home. How do we manage when my child is saying, "Mom, I'm the only one in the class not in the WhatsApp group," or "Mom, why won't you let me on Roblox? What do I say? What do I do? Why am I saying that? Mm-hmm. I know it's bad. Why is it bad? How do I manage YouTube? How do I manage when my 2-year-old has a meltdown when I switch off Peppa Pig?"
Yeah.
There isn't a family in the world, unless you're really living under a rock, that this has not changed the family dynamic in the home. So I really started to recognize that for parents, what was really needed was practical, in-the-moment skills that they can implement in their homes every single day, not only when things go wrong. Mm-hmm. And finally, I think when it came to working with schools, we started to see that when things really do hit the fan, and they're real crises, it's an all-hands-on-deck situation for schools, and it's taking up a lot of time of school leadership. So when there is something like a big sexting scandal or cyberbullying, this is a week of work for a principal. They have to put everything else aside, and these are really busy people. So we started to really recognize a need for, one, ongoing education for kids, and two, parent education that is ongoing, that is equipping parents with everyday skills. And that was really the beginning of Clicked, which we started 6 years ago, together with a clinical psychologist, and I'm sure we'll talk more about exactly what we do later, but that's really how we started. And so we offer schools a full educational program. It's an in-class curriculum that covers everything kids need to know for how to manage addictive technologies, how to manage bullying, how to respond as an upstander, AI, and it's constantly being updated. And we give parents weekly tips on how to manage what's new, what's current, how to put boundaries in place, skills that as parents we just don't have. We are the first generation of parents to have to figure out any of this.
Yeah, very true.
So that's really what we do, and we also do a bunch of talks to parents, to students, and some other exciting stuff coming up in the pipeline as well.
No, that's amazing. I'm glad that you touched on quite a few different things there. You know, you mentioned bullying and sexting scandals and all of that. And, you know, while you were saying that, it's sort of, there's that realization that, you know, these things were in the world before, you know, during my time at school, during your time probably at school. But I think the access now to such a larger platform has made the consequences of this so much higher.
Of course.
Like, you know, you might have had a bullying incident where it was between 2 or 3 kids in your class or in the school, but now all of a sudden it's 1,000 kids.
Absolutely.
You know, sexting, it might be 1 or 2 people, but now it's available to everywhere. You know how we say the internet is written in ink, right? So it's such a bigger consequence, I think, today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same is true with pornography. You know,
Yes.
pornography is not new, but back in the day it was very hard to get, and it was hidden under your bed, and, you know, it was few and far between. And now it's really the click of a button, and it's, you know, hidden in places like Instagram and X, and, you know, you can create it with the click of a button on any kind of AI nudifying app now, and, you know, it's just so accessible. And as you say, the consequences are so more far-reaching. The bullying example you gave, as you said, you know, before everyone had digital devices in their pocket, bullying was something that by and large stayed at school.
Yes.
You know, now the harm is ongoing, the harm is around the clock. A lot of parents are allowing children to sleep with devices next to their beds, and so there really is no end to it. It's not something that is confined to a school environment. It is carried home and carried back to school, and you know, the harm is continuous.
No,
and as you say,
definitely.
far more far-reaching.
So what are sort of some of the strategies that your company is adopting to kind of, I want to say, for the lack of a better term, fight this, you know, battle?
Sure. So I think firstly just education. We always, you know, I think if we don't know what we don't know, and this whole wave of technology has come at such a rapid pace, it happened to us. Nobody imagined in a million years, you know, that we would be where we are and using these devices in the way that we're using them. And I always say often at the beginning of my talks, I don't know if you remember when Steve Jobs used to get up in Silicon Valley and introduce every new Apple product. When he first introduced the iPhone, he held it up and he said, "This is an iPod that can make phone calls." That's what he said. He didn't say, "This is how you're going to do your groceries, this is how you're going to communicate, this is how you're going to conduct your work meetings, this is how you're going to summarize." I mean, and now with AI, I mean, the use cases are 1,000-fold. But Steve, the point I'm trying to make is Steve Jobs himself did not imagine we would be where we were. At the first iPhone did not, you know, when the first smartphone came, it didn't have front-facing camera, it
Yes.
didn't have high-speed internet, and it did not have the capabilities. And we now, for the first time, have 10 years of significant data to show just how harmful these devices really are, particularly on developing minds and brains, and particularly on teenagers, because we now have the first generation of children who have grown up with devices in what we call the phone-based childhood, and we are seeing very, very strong evidence of the harms that they've caused. So I want to start off by saying we're not anti-technology at all. We're pro-technology, but the approach that we use is very much like water safety. You know, we always say to parents, would you take it to your old child, drop them in the pool, no floaty, no swimming lessons, and say, "Figure it out, dude"? No, never. You would give them swimming lessons. You would watch like a hawk. You would put floaties on them. You would get in the water with them. Maybe when they're a little bit more confident, you'd step back a little bit. Only when you're absolutely 1,000% confident would you allow them to be in the pool, and you're still going to keep an eye. But somehow we all kind of leave children, literally leave them to their own devices and say, you know, "I'm going to cook dinner while you on this very harmful device." And I'm not blaming parents. This is not about blaming parents at all. But I think it's about stepping back and saying it is appropriate at this point in time. The world is waking up. We need to recalibrate our relationship with technology. We know information now that we didn't know when it all came into being. You know, it was all very cool, and COVID happened, and everyone's use kind of accelerated quite quickly. But we now need to step back and reevaluate where we want to be and what is appropriate in terms of our children's use of technology. So I think the first step really is around education for children and education for parents on what is beneficial and what is harmful.
And I'm glad you actually said that, and I'm particularly glad you said it's not really anti-technology, because, I mean, the realistic sense is we do need to have technology in our lives. Devices are such a big part of our lives, and you know, life needs to evolve. But I feel like sometimes we just go through very extremes, like, oh no, I'm going to take away this device for a couple of weeks. It's, you know, exam times, we need to cut off the devices. But I think there's also a very, very big benefit to kids using devices. I think, you know, we talk about learning. There's so much availability to learn online today, where previously you might have had to go to a library and sit down and, you know, check out a book. Now it's sort of at your fingertips. But I agree with you. I think we kind of not really looking at what's being consumed, because there's really a lot of great things that can be consumed. Unfortunately, most of the time that's just not the case.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, when parents, probably the most frequently asked question we ever get clicked around device management is, just tell me how much screen time. Just tell me how much I can get. Because let's be honest, parenting is hard. And sometimes all of us, no matter how old your kid is, especially if you have little ones, we need a bit of time out. You need time out to not parent. You need time out to cook dinner. You need time out to take a work phone call or just take a breather. And sometimes devices are really handy at that. But, you know, there's a couple of ways I answer that question. And the first thing I say to parents is, not all screens are equal. There's a difference between, you know, I can't give you one magic number, because there's a difference between 1 hour, 2 hours of Fortnite where your child is getting a dopamine hit like nothing before, and getting off, and they'll be moody and grumpy and aggravated, and then, you know, anything in the real world is really hard to engage in, or an hour of screen time speaking to granny and cousins overseas. That's a very different scenario.
Yeah.
You know, again, with what you're consuming, are you watching very violent, explicit content, or are you watching something more moderate, not as stimulating? So it's definitely about what is being consumed and what are you engaging with. But what's interesting about that question is, you know, initially when the first piece of research came out about how much screen time is too much, etc., the first people to do this research years ago were the American Academy of Pediatrics. And initially they had very, very rigid guidelines, and they said, you know, 0 to 2, 0 screen time at all, and they still kind of maintain that between 0 and 2, there's very little benefit in screen time for kids. You know, it's overstimulating, etc. And 2 to 5, 1 hour a day of educational content. And now, you know, that research has been turned upside down, because they've recognized how prolific screens are in our lives, and that not all screens are the same. But what they really say now, and what we fundamentally believe at Clicked, is the question we rather need to be asking, as opposed to how much screen time in a very rigid guideline, is what is the screen displacing? What is the screen displacing? So in other words, what are the core skills my child needs to be developing and working on to grow and thrive? And is the screen getting in the way of my child developing those skills? So an example, if you have little kids, is my child using a screen to learn how to regulate and calm down? Are they not able to calm down without a screen? Then that might be a problem, because if that's the way they're learning to regulate, how are they going to learn to regulate without the screen? They need to know how to manage and regulate and manage their emotions. When they're older, is the screen the only thing my child can do when they're bored to entertain themselves? Or are they interested in Lego? Are they getting enough outside time? Are they getting enough face-to-face social interaction? Are they learning how to push through hard things? This is my big, big thing at Clicked. This is what we focus on a lot. Kids today are not getting enough developing the muscle of pushing through hard things and fostering those skills of resilience, because everything is quick, everything is easy, everything is autoplay, everything is next. And, you know, especially when you're younger, we're developing the circuitry in our body of what feels good, what feels nice. And when everything is quick and easy and on autoplay, and you're subject to an algorithm, which we definitely need to talk about, you're not fostering the skills of sitting through something uncomfortable and pushing through and trying again. If the maths test was hard, coming back, learning harder, trying again. If you had a fight with someone at school, you've got to build those muscles and flex and be able to look them in the eye and figure that out, not just swipe next and close the chat. These are the core human skills and fundamental skills our kids need to be developing. And I think that is the biggest question as parents we need to be asking. Is the screen getting in the way of our kids building those core human skills? The frustration tolerance, pushing through hard things. If your child has had exercise, done their homework, had a busy day of sport, spent time with friends, and those core ingredients are there. Of course, everyone needs to unwind a little bit. If screens or what their favorite TV show or family movie night is how they unwind, that's fantastic. I'm not anti-tech, as I said. But we need to make sure that they're getting everything they need and that the screen is not replacing those core skills.
I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. You mentioned that, kid will come home and say, all my friends are on, have phones or on Instagram or whatever. How do we sort of balance that? Because there is, unfortunately, that worry that, yes, we want to sort of hold our kids back from getting too involved in, or growing up too quickly. But unfortunately, that's also the real world that we're in right now. And there's always that concern that, yes, we want to hold them back because we feel like it's the right thing to do, but that might result in them being ostracized or being left out because they don't have that access to those sort of things. How do we balance that?
Sure. So there's a book that has really it was published 2 years ago. It's called The Anxious Generation by a social psychologist called Jonathan Haidt. And this book has actually been very powerful in creating ripple effects all over the world to address exactly what you're saying. So just a little context to the book, and then I'll answer your question. He is a social psychologist, and he put together probably the most significant piece of research, 10 years of data showing the harms of children who have grown up in what he calls a phone-based childhood, showing the graphs that show, along with access to a personal handheld device, come increased self-harm rates, increased admissions to psychiatric units, increased depression, anxiety, particularly amongst teenage girls. The graphs are quite staggering when you actually look at them. They just go.
Yeah.
And he says, the whole premise of his book is he says we've overprotected our children in the real world and we've underprotected them online. And really, he says we've spent all this time saying don't talk to strangers in parks and let's put fences around pools and, but stay at home on TikTok where it's safe.
Yeah.
And we, as I said in the beginning, we need to really stop, pause, and reevaluate now, because for the first time, I think everyone in the world, if you look at what's going on all over the world with legislation stepping up and big court cases against Silicon Valley big tech companies, people are becoming far more alive to the harms caused by these big tech companies. And in his book, he makes 4 recommendations. And he says if we can do these 4 things, we can significantly reduce the mental health status of teenagers. And the first thing he recommends is to delay smartphones until high school and delay social media and the second thing is delay social media until 16. And he talks about the power, and I've seen this myself, I've done it in my own child's school, of a collective parent pact. So what this means is, because a lot of parents really, no good parent wants their child to be excluded, right? That's the last thing any parent wants for their child. And it is absolutely, as you said, it's a reality. If there gets a point for many parents where kids are using devices, WhatsApp, platforms like Snapchat, to make all their social arrangements, and if your child isn't on them, they are left out, and nobody wants that for their children. So the power of a parent pact is when you get a group of parents together and say collectively, as a group, we are all delaying. We all agree that this is not something we want for our children, and we all collectively delaying, and therefore none of our kids will have a smartphone until high school, or none of our children will have a Snapchat until 16, and we take away that social pressure. The only reason parents are getting their kids devices earlier and earlier is because of that social pressure.
Yeah.
It's not that they have to be in touch with them all day long. That's not the reason. It's purely that social pressure. So by entering into these collective parent pacts, the idea is we remove that social pressure. And we have a wonderful organization in South Africa called Smartphone Free Childhood SA. They call themselves SFC SA. If there are show notes, I can share the details with you. And basically how it works is that you can go on, you can choose, they've listed every school in the country, you can choose your child's school and grade, current grade as a drop-down and say, I agree to delay smartphones until high school. And when there are 10 or more parents who also agree, you'll be notified. The pact will be what they call active, and you know that those are the same parents in your child's grade and school that are on the same page as you, that you're not doing this alone. And that makes the world of difference, because suddenly we take away that social pressure. Kids have always been the same. They always want the same cards, they always want the same squishies, they always want the same water bottles, and the smartphones are just the next version of that, right? But a lot more powerful. And once you're in, it's hard to backtrack. So this is a very powerful, and it seems daunting, but it's actually probably the easiest thing parents can do. Because when you start having to worry about parental controls and DNS settings and Wi-Fi settings, you know, that's tough. But this is certainly, you know, delay as much as possible is my number one advice to having a personal smartphone. I'm not saying, I understand in reality some kids in South Africa need to use public transport, but there are ways around all of that. There are dumb phones. You can strip a phone of most of its functionality if necessary. There's no reason a child needs to have permanent access to the internet and social media platforms the minute, you know, at a very young age.
No, it's very, very true. You mentioned there that, you know, once you're in it, it's sort of very difficult to come out, right? Unfortunately, we're in the scenario. I mean, you know, I spoke to you. I'm probably one of the worst people with regards to this. But, you know, there is unfortunately bad habits that have been created, right? What's the first step to sort of fixing that or heading in the right direction?
So I'm so glad you asked that, because as I said, it's hard to get out of it. I was thinking that I don't want parents listening to think, oh, it's too late, I've lost the battle. It's not too late. It's not too late to change. It's not too late to backpedal. It's not easy, but it's definitely not impossible. And I think our big focus at Clicked in all our content that we send out to parents is having open and honest conversations, is making technology, it's not the white elephant in the room. It's not, we want to move away from this place of hysteria around this conversation, because it's such a friction point for so many families. And, you know, it's such an emotive thing for so many families, and it's the subject of a power struggle for so many families. They're fighting about the screen, they're fighting about video games, you know, and we want to try and move away from that and really just to a place of calm and a place where we can talk about it. And so we encourage parents to say, you know what, I listened to this really interesting conversation today, and I actually learned quite a lot about devices that I didn't actually know. And I think that maybe we need to relook at how all of us in our family are using technology. And what do you think about it? And I think I want to try for a while, you know, to change things. And maybe we're going to look at only playing video games on a Saturday and Sunday after lunchtime, or whatever it works, whatever it is for your family. We actually have a really lovely device on our Clicked website, which is a family screen time contract, where you can actually write how and when the device will be used, you know, and the child has to agree, I'm not going to use it for bullying, these are the times I'll use it, I won't sleep with it in my room, etc. And really based on your own family value system. And then what that also allows you to do, once you've re-established what the ground rules are, is to say, you know, if and when your child, and it's probably an if, because all kids will try and push the boundaries. If you find they're not sticking to the deal, instead of, I told you not to do this, why are you doing this, why did you? It's really just a transactional, contractual discussion. We have to try and lower the volume around this whole conversation. We have to just say, my sweetie pie, I can see this is hard for you to stick to what we've agreed. I think we're going to pause on Minecraft or Roblox, whatever it may be. I hope it's not Roblox. Whatever it may be, I can see this is hard for you. I can see you're not ready for it. We're going to pause and try again in 3 months. You'll put a timeline in place. But then it's lowering the volume. It's simply a matter of, we agreed to X. You didn't do X. We're going to pause and try again another time. End. And there will be pushback and there will be meltdowns, but that's how we have to try and approach these discussions. Just like any other, you know, agreement and you know, non-negotiable in the house.
You know, I think you touched on something really important there, is that number one, I like the way you said that it's not just, you know, if something goes wrong, you just punishing and screaming, but sort of having that one-on-one conversation with the children. But the other thing that I really love that you brought out is the buy-in that's needed from the parents. Because I think, you know, we can be a little bit hypocritical with regards to that. Hey, we taking away, you know, devices for the next week, and while you guys are playing, we're sitting on our phones and watching TikTok or Instagram or something like that. So I'm actually really glad that you said that, because I think there is a need, a balanced need. We need to buy in as well. If we want to make these changes in our family, we need to put our money where our mouth is.
And again, I mean, I say this with zero judgment. You know, we were all addicted to our devices. The devices are doing what they were designed to do, which is to keep us hooked, of course. But we are highly dependent on them, and that's just increasing with every new tool and that is invented every single day, and every new app and every new AI platform that's coming out every minute. But just a little practical tip that I always found valuable to share with parents. I'm not saying, well, two things actually. Firstly, super valuable to carve out device-free pockets and zones in your home, whether it's the meal time, whether it's, you know, whatever that may be, but zones that are device-free, where you're saying, I value this time, I'm 100% present, we're focusing on each other, there are zero distractions. Because even just a device upside down on the table, there's research to show that that in itself is distracting. The second thing I say to parents is, you know, we fully recognize that we all are multitasking, and in some ways devices have enabled us to do more as parents. We can take a phone call and be at soccer and, you know, do a few things. But when we are with our children and we have to attend to something urgently, instead of just zoning out and being dead to the world, which I think is a peeve of all parents, when our kids are monosyllabic and not responding because they're on a screen, it's equally distressing to a child when we disappear into a work email or phone call. So a practical tip that I always share with parents is I say, if you have to attend to something on your device, announce your intentions. Say to your child, my sweetie pie, I'm so sorry to interrupt what we're doing. I have to reply to this urgent email. It's very important for work. I have to respond to something for tomorrow. I'm going to step out the room. I'm going to reply to my email, and I'm going to come back in and be all yours. And in doing that, we really are stepping out of the technology, stepping out of that moment, using the technology and stepping back and still being present, as opposed to just cutting ourselves off and being distracted and having our attention fragmented. So 2 practical things that parents can do straight away.
Sarah, this is usually the time where we start wrapping up our episode, but I am so enjoying this conversation, and I feel like we just scratched the surface, so we definitely going to have you back in our next episode, and just carry on chatting about this, which I'm really, really looking forward to.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
So join us for part 2 of this brilliant discussion we have with Sarah Hoffman from Clicked. My name is Mohammed Ibrahim Tayyab, and you're watching Chat EBT. Until next time.